At Novavax, we are relentlessly committed to one goal: providing protection against the world's most urgent infectious disease threats. Protection for families, for communities, for the world. We are working to create best-in-class vaccines by focusing on what matters most: proving safety, establishing efficacy, trusted science, persistent hope. A protein-based established formulation is our foundation. An innovative recombinant nanoparticle technology platform is our difference. Developing adjuvanted vaccines against emerging and evolving infectious diseases is our strength. Our team of experts is working in partnership with leading organizations from around the globe to resolutely advance our pipeline so that whenever a vaccine is needed by anyone, Novavax is there. This is our commitment. Novavax.
Our next session focuses on health equity and vaccine confidence. Please welcome your moderator, Beth Maloney.
Hi, good afternoon. I see we've got people wandering back in from lunch. I hope it was enjoyable. And I'm your moderator, Beth Maloney. I'm president of Palladian Partners. Palladian is a science and health communications company honored to serve the NIH for the past 25 years and especially the past 18 months. The pandemic and the far-reaching response to George Floyd's death have shined a light on racism and disparities in our society and especially our healthcare system. The government-led operations to develop COVID-19 vaccines at record speed stirred the memories of Black communities betrayed by the U.S. government's public health service that conducted the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in Black men, and the unwitting participation of Henrietta Lacks in generations of biomedical research. Only this year did the AMA adopt guidelines that confront systemic racism in medicine. The AMA's June 15th statement includes, "The nation's physicians and medical students today continue to acknowledge the realities of structural racism in medicine by adding to policy that informs the American Medical Association's ambitious work to dismantle racist policies and practices across all of healthcare." Dr. Thomas, as one of the nation's leading scholars in the effort to eliminate racial and ethnic health disparities, I can only imagine that you and colleagues at the Maryland Center for Health Equity are thinking, it's about time that leadership across healthcare and biomedical research organizations are paying attention to health disparities in minority communities at this scale. Dr. Thomas, would you please share your point of view on the challenges facing minorities who are trying to obtain fair and equitable healthcare, and how prevalent are issues of mistrust in healthcare in general, and especially participation in clinical trials?
Well, what a wonderful introduction, and I wish I was there with you in person, but I've been in this Zoom space for so long, and I'm glad that you were able to accommodate us in this hybrid mode. Well, what an opening. Trust matters, and it's unfortunate that it took a pandemic to truly expose the broken, the cracks in our system. Let's first acknowledge the miracle of the vaccines, right? Unbelievable demonstration of our bioscience technology. Warp speed made it happen. We didn't cut scientific corners. We removed some of the bureaucratic red tape, and look what we have. Vaccines that work in record time. It's like a miracle. So why is it that when you look at the numbers today, we look like a country with no vaccine? How is that possible? That we can't get the vaccine, a life-saving vaccine, into the arms of the very people who need it the most. I think that is the challenge and the opportunity in front of us today. So the real context to understand Tuskegee, since it comes up time and time again as the reason why people of color, black people in particular, are hesitant, is to realize this, that in those 40 years, the government did everything within its power, including mobilizing every single health department in the country and draft offices. Don't forget, 1932, 1972, we had a world war in there. They mobilized all those government offices to make sure those men were not treated. They gave them a list. Do not treat them. So what is the real lesson today? The real lesson today is for the government, us, to do everything within our power to deliver that life-saving vaccine to our most vulnerable citizens and residents. And so it's in that context, I think we need to get the context straight, and we need to celebrate all the things we're doing to reach those what I call the last mile communities. Those communities that don't have a relationship with a medical home. Those communities who naturally simply distrust the healthcare system. This is our chance to rebuild that relationship. And in the course of our panel today, I hope to share with you what we're doing on the ground, in the neighborhoods, and some of the toughest parts of where we know the health disparities exist. I've been doing this work for 30 years, but guess what? I got the hospital systems answering my phone calls now. In fact, I'm not even calling them. They're calling me. They're saying, hey, can we bring our mobile unit to your barbershop? And you know what I say? Absolutely. If you are willing to stay. And I'll end with this. The people are saying, if they only come and give us the jab and leave us with the cancer and the diabetes and the heart disease, then they really don't care about us. They just want us to go out and spend money and shop and not spread disease. But they don't care if we simply live sicker and die younger. So we don't want to go back to normal. And that's the challenge, I think, to all of us here today. Now that we know, and now that we know some of the innovative things that work, let's not dismantle the infrastructure that's making it possible to reach the last mile communities. And let's lift up many of the community-based organizations and the community health workers that are now recognized as part of helping deliver the message and to dispel myths. Be mindful, our communities have been marinating in misinformation since the beginning of this pandemic, and it hasn't stopped. And let's acknowledge the well-funded efforts to absolutely undermine everything we're trying to do here right now. If we ignore that, we're ignoring something that did not exist in the past as a force that we're running up against.
Thank you,
No
Dr.
one could have imagined, no one could have imagined elected officials preventing us from actually doing what we know can save lives. Okay, I'm gonna be quiet now.
Yeah, thank you. We'll come back to some of those points on infrastructure and what the new normal is. I'd like to go to Dr. Lisa Dunkle. In your role as Clinical Development Global Medical Lead at Novavax, could you please describe Novavax's commitment to diversity in clinical trials and how that has manifested in recruitment efforts and enrollment numbers? Please also share lessons learned through partnerships with HBCUs and Indigenous leaders.
Well, thank you, Beth. It's a pleasure to be here. When I joined Novavax last summer in 2020, it was to help shepherd through the clinical trial that was funded by the U.S. government, then known as Operation Warp Speed. And I knew from the beginning that there was an expectation that we would include in our clinical trial the people who had been most adversely impacted by the pandemic. And it was also a period, as everyone remembers, of enormous social upheaval in the U.S. And I have to say that in that context, I had my eyes opened, and I had to educate myself about all the things I didn't learn back when I was a young person, going to school and not being taught about the things that Dr. Thomas has talked about, and many other terrible things that went on. So I was very, very serious, and Novavax was very committed to doing this right, to bringing our vaccine and our trial to all the people who were going to need to know that it worked for them and not just those other people across town. And to that end, we made an enormous effort to make sure that our clinical trial sites were sites that had access to people of color, to racial and ethnic minorities, to indigenous populations. We chose sites that in many instances were relatively inexperienced in clinical research. However, they took care of Black and brown people and Native Americans on Indian tribal nations in the West. And it was important that those people participate in this trial. And we knew that they were going to need our help and our CRO's help to make sure that they could do what they wanted to do. They wanted to bring this vaccine and this research to their people. They needed help, and we were committed to give it to them. So that was a commitment we made in the middle of the summer of 2020 when we started selecting our sites and getting ready to go. We spent a good 2 to 3 months making sure that we had all the right places involved so that our trial would adequately and appropriately reflect the profile of the American population.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to Dr. Hepburn and congratulate you on your new role in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. And thank you for joining us on your second day working at the White House. As immediate past director for COVID vaccine development within the HHS-DoD Countermeasures Acceleration Group, formerly known as Operation Warp Speed, could you please speak to the government's efforts during the pandemic to overcome issues of mistrust and ensure diversity in the vaccine clinical trials?
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you for including me in this discussion. It's so important. I also want to capture, sometimes when we have meetings and people talk and you talk forever and you don't capture key points. But my fellow panelists said something that I just think we just got to keep saying it over and over again. And that is, we cannot go back to normal. We cannot go back to normal in biomedical research. We can't go back to normal in product development. We have people dying of diseases that are treatable and curable, and we cannot go back to normal. And so if everybody goes home and just remembers sort of that theme and mantra and commits to that, I think our panel has accomplished what we're trying to do. Let me make a couple other specific comments. I think the first is I need to acknowledge Lisa in particular as really one of the heroes of this pandemic. I won't embarrass the group with her story, but she was one of those people that said, this is so important. I'm going to put the rest of my life to the side, and I'm going to put my heart and soul into, in this case, the clinical, the safety and efficacy evaluation of the Novavax product. And we have literally thousands, you could probably say even millions, of healthcare workers, research volunteers, and manufacturing people working in the plants right now, and the public health and the pharmacies that are delivering vaccines. I mean, there's literally millions of people in America that have put their life on hold and have really contributed to this fight against the pandemic. And I think it's been tragic and heart-wrenching. And so I feel that this collective sense of, I really wish we had done better. But let's not forget that there were so many heroes out there. And I had a chance to work with Lisa very closely in this pandemic, and she's certainly one of them. I want to highlight that when we started Operation Warp Speed, It was just pretty much a litany of what couldn't be done. So you can't develop a vaccine that fast. You can't develop a vaccine and still maintain the highest quality standards in manufacturing, the highest quality safety standards. And we did. And I'm glad my fellow panelists mentioned the phrase that we've been saying every day, that we will not cut corners, that we will achieve the highest safety, quality, efficacy standards all the way through regulatory approval. And it was a commitment to that. Now, we had to spend money, meaning that we had to manufacture doses very early in the process. That's usually sequential. So we would characterize that as financial risk, but it was never compromising kind of the safety, the quality, and the efficacy of the vaccines. And I agree that it's been really perplexing and disappointing why that message has not been received, and we need to be very thoughtful about the misunderstanding and the misinformation that surrounds it. I also feel like that there was a concerted effort to be as transparent as possible. And with Novavax, let's use Novavax as an example, their findings made public through the FDA process, through the peer publications in peer-reviewed journals, and making the data from these clinical trials publicly available. But one of the main things that we were told, and Lisa, you could chime right in here, but we were told when we were starting and setting up these clinical trials, they said, look, Matt, you have to make a choice. If you want to enroll populations that are going to be representative of the American people, that are going to be representative of the groups that this pandemic is taking a terrible toll, it's going to take longer. You can't get your 30,000 volunteer clinical trial done if you're going to do all of the outreach and trust building and all of those things that are going to go in to make a clinical trial truly equitable. And everybody said that. They said, so Matt, make a choice. And I think we as a government refused to make that choice. And that was one of the things I think we did pretty well. And that it certainly wasn't me. I was a huge proponent of this, but it really came from a lot of leadership at the National Institute of Health. That Francis Collins was really a champion of this issue. But it was the entire group, National Institute of Health, and it was our colleagues at HHS-DoD. But I think it was also that it was an example. We can argue how often this happens, but I think it was an example of leaders in the communities, and really the public itself, saying that if you want this vaccine to be taken by the American people, you need to make sure the clinical trial represents those that are getting sick. And that's our expectation for our government. I feel like that we as a government listened. And then I feel like what we as our government then did is we reflected that to Novavax and Moderna and AstraZeneca, to the different groups that we were funding. We're saying we are providing, taxpayer resources for you to run this clinical trial because it's so important. But we have certain expectations. And I think that's where government can be very useful in this space, that we can say, here are the standards, here are the expectations. If we're paying for it, it will not be acceptable, X, Y, or Z. You have to achieve a more equitable clinical trial. So I feel like we did that. And I feel like Novavax, as a great example, really responded to that. And the exciting part is that we showed that it could be done, and that you don't have to compromise the safety of your trial. You don't have to compromise the quality of your trial. And you actually don't even need to compromise the speed of your trial. You just have to really care, and you have to work really hard, like Lisa did and her team did. And you have to go out and meet people where they are. And you have to use, there's a lot of different community approaches. So what's incumbent on us as we go forward, too, is to try to figure out, to take people like Lisa, and I can give you a long list of others who've been working in this space with our other vaccine companies, as well as on the government side, and really think, well, what worked best? You know, what truly worked best of what they did? Let me give one quick example. Lisa, please chime in here. Part of it, you know, it was sort of the real estate thing in some ways. It's all about location, location, location. And what we found with Lisa and with Novavax and with the other companies is that if your clinical trial site was really embedded in that community, and that community had, you know, had minority demographics and sort of minority commitment to clinical research, that those sites really did recruit minorities in clinical trials. Lisa, I'd love to maybe just get a little bit, if you want to comment a little bit more, and then I'll wrap up.
Well, that's very true, and thank you all for your very kind words, Matt. We, in the selection of our trials, the first questions we asked every potential investigator was, what is your access to minority populations? Who do you take care of? Who can you recruit to trials? We had participating, as you know, 3 of the 4 historically Black colleges and universities, the medical schools associated with them. We had other sites, plenty in the South and Southwest, where we knew that we had access to Hispanics. We have two sites at Native American tribal nations in the far West. And we knew that those were the people who really needed to have access to the trial. So, you know, we spent 2 or 3 months making sure that those are the people we had to participate in the trial.
Beth, why don't I turn it back over to you, but we're happy to keep talking and answer questions.
Well, thank you both, and especially Dr. Hepburn, for just emphasizing the leadership essential in promoting health equity and all that we're trying to achieve. So I'd like to shift back to Dr. Thomas. So we've gone from clinical trial recruitment in large part to promoting vaccination among 12 years of age and older. So I'm curious, what trends are you seeing among minority populations and vaccine hesitancy? And please do tell us about these Shots at the Shops program.
Well, you see these polls behind me. They're not just the barbershop. It's also a metaphor. It's a metaphor for meeting people in the sacred space in their community. And if I were talking to you about churches and I had iconography of religious organizations, you'd all get it out there. I think that this pandemic has opened the door for other partners to step forward. And so when you talk about that 12-year-old age group, they are not at the age of consent, okay? They have to have an adult bring them. And if you're in a household where the adults are hesitant, guess what? No matter what those kids want, they're not going to be able to get vaccinated. So what we have found is that you have to spend the time. And I have to tell my friends out there, no self-respecting black barber or stylist would ever say, I'll get you in and out in 15 minutes. And it doesn't matter how much hair you have, Matt. And so sitting in that chair, when those families come in for that, you know, sitting down, and it's a family affair. I have to tell my friends, it's not a supercuts or a hair cutlery. You're there for hours. And what was going on in those spaces were the circulation of misinformation. What we did with our Shots at the Shop is literally help transform these places into trusted information centers. And in 3 of our barbershops and salons now, we have our salon and stylists certified as community health workers from the state of Maryland. So Matt, that's a game changer. If they are partners with us, they can help dispel the myths. We bring the clinical trial investigators into the barbershops and salons. And so I'm just hoping that we don't retreat. Hesitancy does not mean never. And with all the things that we're learning, we just released a report just last week on some of the things that we're finding. One key recommendation, and then I'm going to be quiet for a moment, utilize the COVID-19 vaccination campaigns as the foundation for our sustainable health promotion activities with community partners. We have delivered vaccine, needles in arms, in big mega churches in the Black community right here in Prince George's County, Maryland. We have actually delivered needles in arms in barbershops and beauty salons. Who could have imagined that? And I have hospital administrators who have discovered, oh, here's how we keep people healthy. Here in the state of Maryland with global budgets, here is how we do the outreach and maintain an infrastructure in the community. Now that we have zip code heat maps, Matt, during COVID, they could tell me exactly what zip code to go into where there was low vaccination. That kind of targeting, can we not do that for diabetes, hypertension? What other products does Novavax have in its pipeline, or are there other pharmaceutical companies that can address the health disparities? I'm saying this because if we could reach the targets for minority recruitment with sufficient numbers to answer scientific questions, and that's what the Novavax and the other trials did. It wasn't just you had a proportion of minorities, you had a sufficient proportion to answer a scientific question. Why can't we do that for the other diseases? The community is expecting that. So what did Novavax, Moderna, Pfizer, all of them, what did they do differently that made these trials reach scientifically relevant targets for conclusions? Whereas in many other conditions, we do not see sufficient numbers of minorities in the trials. So let's take those lessons, just like we're going to take the warp speed lessons forward. Let's take the lessons from all the companies about how they achieved that recruitment success and build it into our infrastructure moving forward. And so the trend for me right now, in terms of what you're describing, is that hesitancy is real. And Matt, we had people come in hesitant, and they left hesitant, but vaccinated. You don't have to change their worldview. You don't have to have a debate about is gravity real. Those are the rabbit holes I see some of our health professionals going down, trying to actually have a debate. Our barbers are teaching us the way, and the way is through relationship. Relationship matters, multiple contacts, and a trusted venue. And it's amazing to see people convert, literally convert, in the barbershop and salon chair.
Dr. Thomas, that's amazing. Thank you. And it's a great segue to where I wanted to take it back to Dr. Dunkle and Dr. Hepburn. We've mentioned there's a lot of examples here of public-private partnership and collaboration that was really essential to make the progress accomplished in the COVID-19 vaccine development. So what do we need to do going forward to ensure that we have more robust infrastructure for research that promotes health equity, especially if we have to move at warp speed again? Lisa, would you like to start?
Well, I guess it's from my perspective, it's sort of a personal decision, but I think it's also a societal decision that, as Matt said earlier, we can't go back to where we were. It just can't happen. So it's time for medicine and the society and clinical research as a part of medicine to take the step around the corner and go in a different direction. We have not treated all of our people the way they should have been treated. We have not paid attention to them. And I think it's just high time that major changes are made in the way we look at our society. We are all members of the human race, nothing else, and nothing else matters. We have to take care of each other, and we have to figure out a way to do that. I think Matt and his team and all the rest of the folks at the White House are trying very hard. But all of society has got to take that step. I mean, we just really can't go back to where we were.
And if I could just say to Lisa and put some numbers on it, the White House embraced our barbershop outreach. And Lisa, do you know we have over 900 barbershops and salons across the country enrolled in the program?
Cool.
And they are seeing themselves as saving lives. We connected with the National Association of County and City Health Officials, and any shop that needs a clinical partner, Matt, we're able to connect them to a clinical partner. Amazing.
Well, Matt, I want to bring it back to you. I want to make sure we allow time for audience questions, so we're going to come to you all next. But feel free to comment on public-private partnership and where we need to go for in the future. But if you could also tie into that, I mean, it's only your second day at the White House, but I did catch the Bloomberg article in which you said we can actually take pandemics off the table. So any hints you can share with us about your new role and that prediction?
Yeah, in 1 minute or less.
Yeah, we'll give you a couple of minutes and then we'll open it up.
No, I understand. No, it's great. Well, this is a great discussion, by the way. I love this panel. Wish we could go on further. I do, I really feel strongly compelled to agree with you in terms of this idea that, in order to vaccinate America for COVID, we can focus all day. Oh, we should have done this. We should have done that, and all that. But there are some things that are working, and that it's going to break our hearts. It's going to break my heart if we make the COVID vaccination effort a one-off instead of looking at how we have. It's exactly your point. I just feel like I'm rephrasing it, but it deeply resonates with me. And some of the places that we can even start is vaccination against other pathogens. It's a pneumococcal vaccine for at-risk COPDers. It's the shingles vaccine. We can go on a list of different vaccines. We've created a vaccine infrastructure to reach people. Why then can't we put other vaccines that we know have great impact? Hepatitis B vaccine. There's a good list of existing vaccines. Then we can say, well, and then our next generation vaccines, wouldn't it be great if we had a next generation influenza vaccine? And that's going to be a research and development effort. And Novavax has been working on flu vaccines. But, if we vaccinated everybody for seasonal flu, we'd see a dramatic impact on that. And again, seasonal influenza affects people with comorbidities. It affects people with underlying lung conditions and those types of, again, these vulnerable populations. And so I can go on dozens of examples, but of how I just very strongly agree with you. And I think the challenge for us is going to be kind of sustaining the funding. It's going to be sustaining the effort. But it's also going to be sustaining the message. And I'm glad, sort of, Beth, to tie this back into sort of taking pandemics off the table. I think last spring and summer, certainly I personally, but I think we all felt sort of this like, wow, look what we can do. If we cooperate, if we work together as a nation, we can show these different vaccines, multiple vaccines, safe and effective, and we can scale those and we can administer those across America. And it sort of led to, I think, a sense of optimism. A lot of people I talked with were like, gosh, we can vaccinate against this thing and that thing, and we can make cancer treatments more affordable through RNA technology, and all these very technologically promising, it makes you feel like anything's possible if we really put our minds to it, and that we actually have technology that can do extraordinary things. And then I feel like the Delta wave hit, and the tragedy of the Delta variant, the tragedy of unvaccinated people getting sick, and then it was like everybody was arguing, and we sort of, I think we lost a bit of that sense of optimism. And where I want to try to recapture it is not a Pollyanna, like, let's just put a lot of money and invest, and then we're going to make all these different vaccines. But it's this idea of, can we make products that are truly safe and effective and make a huge difference in people's lives? But can we couple that as part of a more comprehensive approach to keeping our population healthy. And I think we're all touching on this, but it's like, I was hoping that if people gained confidence instead of lost confidence in vaccines because of this pandemic, it would open the door for us to have conversations about health, vaccinating, but health behaviors in general, and all those things that we need to do to reach out to communities and to have a more equitable health system. So I guess in conclusion, I think, we want to take pandemics off the table, and I'm at the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And so we sort of, in my role here, it sort of starts with that foundation of biomedical research, innovation, and product development, and all those things. But I'm determined that we will be, looking at this in terms of that broader opportunity. And hopefully these kind of conversations, we can catalyze a little bit of optimism too, which I think this panel's doing.
Well, and I think you all did, especially being the panel right after lunch. Hopefully this didn't give you any lunch coma, but really stimulated a lot of good thought. So I see some microphone over here. Anyone in the room with a question for our panelists? Step on up to the mic.
And while they're stepping up to the mic, let me say to Matt, Matt, be sure to give a shout out to Dr. Cameron Webb there, your wingman over in the White House, because his role has been tremendous. He got on a White House road trip, went down south, and visited the barbershops and salons. And one of the things he said, we can't go down with just COVID. We had a symposium on back to work safety. Then we had a visit to a barbershop, Needles and Arms. Then we had a community forum on education. You got to combine these things. That's what the community is looking for.
Yeah, it's not only the focus on health equity, but the holistic health, and not just infectious diseases. Well, I'll say, Dr. Thomas, one of the questions I didn't think I was going to have time to ask you, but since we have a shy crowd, I'm going to go ahead and pepper in one or two more.
I'll take him out to the shop.
There we go. Especially thinking about this younger generation and how the census of the U.S. is skewing less white as we get into the younger generation. And I know you were talking about those in they're living in the household of, mom and dad or grandparents. They're really going to follow the sentiment of those guardians. But I'm curious, in that kind of like 18 to 20, are you seeing any shift in sentiment among Black and Brown communities? And is Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, who I'm a fan of, and if y'all don't follow her on Twitter, please do, she's had an influence that you could tell.
Well, I think, even with our shots at the shop, we have Blacks Against COVID as a partner. We have, believe it or not, Barbicide. If you go into any of these facilities, you'll see the cleaning solutions. That company is on board. And we have Shea Moisture, a private company that actually is providing an incentive, really out of respect for the time of the barbers, $1,000 for each shop. That's a major stepping up of the private sector in this space. So here's what I would say to you that gives me encouragement. When we did our 12-year-olds and up vaccine in a salon, Matt and Lisa, do you know what really struck me? It was the grandmothers. The grandmothers brought those kids in.
I love it.
Oh, yes.
My point to you is that those elders who were the first, the priority, they brought the kids in. That's what I love to see. And when you really get right down to it and beyond the arguments about will the mRNA change my DNA, that's more a distraction. When we really broke it down, Matt, to say, what is your motivation? Why did you get vaccinated today? You know what the young kids that we did vaccinate tell us?
Because Grandma told me to.
Grandma told me, my mother has a heart condition. I want to go to the family reunion. They went down personal, very, very personal. Mm-hmm. And yet, a lot of the material I see is not in that same space. Right. I think we need to pull back the curtain on the suffering. We go to the ICU, we stop at the door, we celebrate the medical workers. We should continue to do that. But when people are being fed information like it's still a hoax, it's not real, you got to go into the ICU. You got to show that person on the ventilator. They don't believe it. I was just in Washington, D.C. at the flags to remember, okay? How is it possible that we can have people that don't believe it? We've got a lot of work to do because there are forces working in just the opposite direction. So we need to plant our flag in trusted places like the churches, the barbershops, and salons. And Lisa, you know we have to stay. How can we help build these facilities as potential recruitment for clinical trials beyond just COVID? I think we can do that successfully.
That long-term partnership. I love it.
We also have hip hop messages. I don't know if that
You're gonna have
audience
to put
out
some
there
of these
is
in the
really-
Zoom chat. We'll have to circulate. I want to hear those. And I see we do have an attendee here with a question, so please step up to the mic. And thank you, Dr. Thomas.
So I think the panel is terrific. I have a comment and then a question. So I can see the barbershop model being used for other medical emergencies where there's hesitancy. When you mention about 12-year-olds coming in, then I think of the vaccine for cervical cancer, Gardasil, which also has an amazingly and disappointingly low rate of vaccination of preteens. And so, you know, are you looking to potentially expand this so that, say, one day, you know, 12-year-olds coming into the barbershop for COVID would come into the barbershop for Gardasil? And then the second thing is there could be a tie between the communities that are underrepresented in vaccination and the communities that are under-vaccinated in STEM education. So also could things like the barbershop model and other similar things be used to also educate the next potential generation of medical solution developers?
Man, that was not a plant. That was a beautiful question. That was right across the plate. Let me see if I can hit it out of the park. Absolutely. The barbers and the stylists are not the medical professionals. They're the trusted liaison that you need. They have the Marcus Welby relationship to the community that our health professions have lost, okay? So in many ways, it's a training opportunity, Matt. When we bring the medical professionals in, they're actually getting trained in how to do a better job in engaging this population. All of them have training budgets. I'm saying this because how do we sustain this? So yeah, I want the health professionals to come in the name of training and to practice their efforts to do recruitment and retention. We've also had flat screen TVs in some of our anchor shops that stream our message. And so you're absolutely right. For the young kids to see a scientist in the barbershop, for some of them, it's the first time they've ever seen a scientist. So we need to make this more normative. We need to get rid of the mystery about it. And the shops are a perfect place for education and outreach. So yes, Gardasil, another success story, but it's associated with sexuality. It's got the same kind of dynamics of pushback. If we don't get this right, Matt and Lisa, we potentially have negative ripple effects for flu and everything else. If we get it right, we should see an uptick in flu vaccine acceptance. The same people who finally got the COVID vaccine, before they did that, they said, I've never taken the flu shot. So this is our opportunity now to get them to the next step. Absolutely. Now, so at least is this. If the clinical partners will come, I got the people. That's been the hard part. The people show up here all the time on a regular basis. My challenge has been, can I get the clinical partner to arrive with the service? We've done it for COVID. We should be able to do it for flu and all the other vaccines.
Well, I think it's been a big learning experience for the industry. The entire coverage of clinical research industry has had to change their focus. And I think that it was a wonderful partnership between the Operation Warp Speed, clinical government, U.S. government. They drove it to the point of pausing enrollment in one of the trials because there weren't enough people of color enrolled. And I mean, they pointed out that we're serious about this. This is the way we want you to do it. And so when I listened to that and I told my management at Novavax, they're serious and we're going to do this right. And it worked.
And Lisa and Matt, if we could get warp speed community engagement, now think about it. Resources were advanced to the pharmaceutical companies in advance for the research and development. Resources advanced for the market, okay, in advance. You guys dropped everything. You even told this audience all the things you were doing that you dropped to focus on COVID. But look at the results. If we had that same focus, laser-like, on community engagement, building bridges, building trust, building community infrastructure, Matt, we would have a bridge to the last mile communities. We wouldn't go through this again.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's our intent here. I think we, I know we're running a bit short of time, but this idea of educating people about health and health behaviors, I think we have to say, let's look at our pandemic experience, and we got to make some changes. We have to educate on health differently, and we don't have time to go into sort of what worked, what didn't, and different things like that. I do think one thing that sort of what was encouraging to me, and I made this point previously, our standard was, you're going to run these clinical trials and you're going to let the public see the results. And the results are going to the regulatory, but there's nothing to hide here. We're going to be completely transparent with data. And I think what you've also seen in the scientific community is so many studies on COVID and on transmission of COVID, and are the vaccines still working or not? We call these real world effectiveness studies. We have safety information. Like, we actually have we're almost near real time collection of massive amounts of data in terms of what COVID's doing to our communities and if the vaccines and treatments are working or not and everything else. And we're putting it out there. And we're putting it out there in peer-reviewed medical journals. And we're saying, look, that a good thing is we have this ethic of putting data out there and interpreting the data to the best of our ability. And that's getting lost. Like, people, and that's, the scientists and the medical researchers saying, what do you want us to do? We're publishing our data. You know what I mean? But then the gap between the publication in the New England Journal of Medicine and the barber shop, we need to figure out how to bridge that gap. We need to talk to people like you, Dr. Thomas, in terms of connecting those two worlds. But those worlds are so different. I'll remain optimistic, though. I think with a warp speed like effort, like you said, in terms of education, communication, the appropriate messages, the trust building, reaching people where they are, I think it can be done. I think we can do better.
Well, and speaking of warp speed, I feel like this panel flew by as I'm keeping an eye on the time. And I know we've got another exciting panel at 2 o'clock. So I'm going to invite the audience just to first just acknowledge the expertise we have in this panel and thank them. And just, I think one of the key takeaways, as Dr. Hepburn was saying, we're not going back to normal. And we know that in our teleworking, telehealth, like all these things that have changed, we're not going back to pre-pandemic in so many ways. And nor should we in vaccine development, drug development. We need to be inclusive. We need to promote health equity. And as we've just heard, we need to build more bridges from the scientific journals to the barbershops and all the communities in between. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for being a great audience.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
That was a great discussion.
I never expected to be an old man with AIDS. At 26, I thought I would never live to see 30.
I was diagnosed with lupus nephritis when I was 19. Taking medication is saving my life.
Raising kids with chronic illness is very difficult. Medicine is our survival.
Having a child with Down syndrome, my goal as his father is to help him live the most fulfilling life.
There's a conversation happening in Washington right now, and I just hope that when politicians are debating about this, that they remember patients like me.
Politicians talk a lot about cost cutting. And I don't think that they drill down and ask at what cost.
Insurance is great until you actually need to use them. Walk a day in my shoes and live our lives. And then you tell me that I can't have the med that would make my kid better.
People with Down syndrome are susceptible to numerous chronic illnesses and diseases, Alzheimer's being one of them. As a father, I'm just not willing to sacrifice the one treatment that could help my son.
There are more families out there like ours. Things need to change.
This isn't a left or right issue. It's a human issue.